We will attempt to sort out the LA Kings' very fluid roster situation for opening night. We'll tell you what lessons have already been learned and what we can expect for the lineup as far as the rest of the season. That's next in this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love for you to leave us a positive comment on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show. And we're also on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for almost 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network. I'm also co-host of the Puck Podcast. It's a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 17 years and a passionate LA Kings fan for 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. We are 2 days away from opening night of the NHL season for the Los Angeles Kings, October 11th. It's the LA Kings hosting the Colorado Avalanche at Crypto.com Arena. Can't wait for it. Hope you had a great weekend. I know I did. I was in Indio, California for Power Trip over the last 3 days. A lot of old school heavy metal rock bands putting on a good show. So I am recovering from that, but also excited to get ready for the start of another NHL season, which is coming very, very soon. We have a ton of things to talk about and tell you what's happened since our last show on Friday. And we have the Kings' final preseason game to mention. We'll touch on that. We've got a look at what the Kings roster is likely going to look like, although we don't know for sure because things are very fluid. We'll get you caught up on the Ontario Reign. We've got a former LA Kings Stanley Cup winner in the news as well. But let's start off by what has happened since our last show, as not only the LA Kings, but teams all over the NHL are finalizing their rosters for opening night. So the Kings need to get that roster set, and there were some decisions that had to be made about players going on waivers. And the first news to report was that the LA Kings placed a pair of forwards, Tyler Madden and Jaret Anderson-Dolan, on waivers. The Kings also sent Alex Turcotte, Alex Laferriere, and Brant Clark to the Ontario Reign in the AHL. They are all waiver exempt, so they were not eligible to be claimed by other teams. Jaret Anderson-Dolan and Tyler Madden would end up not being claimed by any NHL teams, and both are also now with the Ontario Reign. Now, we don't know this for sure, not 100%, but those of you that said the Kings should have put Jaret Anderson-Dolan on waivers instead of forward Samuel Fagemo, who ended up getting claimed by the Nashville Predators, you guys have every right, in my opinion, to be pissed off right now. The Kings end up putting Jaret Anderson-Dolan on waivers anyway. So why not do it a week ago and keep Samuel Fagemo on the active roster? They both make the same salary, $775,000. Now, the Kings would also end up recalling Alex Laferriere to the Kings roster. This is after Jaret Anderson-Dolan was cleared, didn't get claimed on waivers. And I like Laferriere. He's had a great camp, good-looking young player. But I think head-to-head that Samuel Fagemo is currently a better player than Alex Laferriere. I think he's been in the I know he's been in the organization longer. Feel like he's further along in his development and had earned a shot to be on the Kings roster. But because he's not here anymore, Alex Laferriere is getting a chance. And I cannot defend the move of Samuel Fagemo being put on waivers now that we've seen Jaret Anderson-Dolan also being put on waivers. I thought at the time the Kings were saying that Jaret Anderson-Dolan was a more NHL-ready player and that he was going to have a roster spot on that fourth line, and that's why they felt like they couldn't expose him to waivers because he was going to be claimed. Well, turns out they did expose him to waivers, and he wasn't claimed, and they've lost Samuel Fagemo for nothing. So I just think it's a terrible look for the Kings. They lose a valuable young asset for nothing in a move that they didn't have to make. If they were going to send Jaret Anderson-Dolan to put him on waivers anyway, why not do it before, to do it after, and then for him to clear it's a terrible look. It's an absolutely terrible look and very disappointing. As for Brant Clark going to the AHL, it's certainly not based on his talent or his performance this preseason. He outplayed and is more talented than certainly Andreas Englund or Tobias Bjornfoot, who are still on the Kings roster for now. Of course, they both play on the left side, and they're not waiver exempt where Clark is. So he can go up and down from the NHL to the AHL as many times as the Kings want. So rest assured, at some point, Brant Clark is going to be on the LA Kings roster. But for now, to start the season, he's in the AHL. Now, that's okay because the Kings have Jordan Spence. And I've said all along that if this ends up being the way it goes, that I would be more than happy to be okay with Jordan Spence as our third pairing right defenseman on opening night. Like I said, I think ultimately Clark is the better player, and I think ultimately he'll be what we think he's going to be. But for right now, it is Jordan Spence. Look, he has paid his dues. He obviously has a lot more NHL experience under his belt. And I think most importantly, he's played very well this preseason. I think he's earned this. And I'm ready, for him to have his shot on that third pairing. And I feel confident about it. I feel like he's going to do a very good job taking over essentially for Sean Dursey from a year ago. He's going to run that second power play unit. And I think he'll be just fine. I'm not worried about Jordan Spence. However, there was news just a few moments ago. We found out that Jordan Spence was loaned to the AHL, not sent down, but loaned. There's a lot of semantics involved in these roster moves to get the Kings cap compliant for opening night. So I believe Jordan Spence will be recalled for the season opener. I will be shocked if he isn't. All the moves, again, have to do with the salary cap. And it's not easy to follow, and I'm doing the best I can with it. I'm sure it is confusing for some of you that are listening and watching this, but this is kind of the reality for the LA Kings, certainly in the moment, and in some respect, what we're going to see potentially for most of the season. But before we get into that, as for Spence's D partner on the left side, it looks like we don't really know. There's no clarity on that as well. As a matter of fact, it's even a little bit more cloudy because it looks like the Kings are going to carry 7 defensemen to start the season. So Andreas Englund and Tobias Bjornfoot, again, both are not waiver exempt. So if the Kings try and send them down, they can be claimed by another team. And I think the Kings haven't figured out yet exactly which one they prefer on the left side, or they're just afraid of exposing them. And that's why they're both currently on the NHL roster. That could change as soon as tomorrow. We don't know. Things are, like I said, very fluid. But in my mind, and if you've watched this show, I think Andreas Englund has totally outplayed Tobias Bjornfoot, which, by the way, I wasn't hoping for. I went into this totally open-minded. I was certainly leaning towards Tobias Bjornfoot wanting to win that job because the Kings invested a first-round draft pick in him. I do think he's very talented, smooth skater, puck mover. Andreas Englund kind of plodding, but he's outplayed Bjornfoot. He's been better. He's been more impactful. He's been physical. He's been defensively responsible, and he's just been better on the ice, in my opinion. So how this situation is going to ultimately play out, I don't know. But for the moment, it is Tobias Bjornfoot and Andreas Englund, both still on the roster. They might both play on opening night on the left side for the LA Kings on that third pairing. You also may have noticed I didn't mention that the Kings placed one of their 3 goaltenders on waivers. Yet, as it stands now, Cam Talbot, David Riddick, Phoenix Copley are all still on the roster. Now, Talbot had a bad outing in the Kings' last preseason game. We'll touch on that more in a little bit. But Copley had a rough first preseason game, rebounded and looked a lot better in his second start. Rittich had one good start and had a couple of good relief appearances. The anticipation was that David Riddick would be sent down to the minor leagues, to Ontario. What is complicating this? Why is this the case? Well, I'm not in the room with GM Rob Blake and head coach Todd McClellan and the other folks in there that are helping them to navigate what's going on with the salary cap. But I think it's just the fact they don't want to lose one of these guys to waivers. And right now, if you've followed the NHL, the Tampa Bay Lightning have lost their top goalie, Andrei Vasilevsky, for the first couple months of the season. The 2 guys they have to replace him have almost no NHL experience. And even though Tampa Bay is a good team, they need somebody with NHL experience who plays in net. And that would apply to all three of the Kings' current goalies right now. I believe, and I think the Kings do as well, if they expose one of those guys to waivers, Tampa Bay or another team is going to claim one of them. And right now, they're so uncertain right now about who their tandem should be in net that they don't feel like they can risk losing one of them right now. So it is very unprecedented. The Kings are not going to carry three goalies all year long. They may do it at the beginning of the year until things maybe settle down across the NHL. Maybe Tampa Bay picks up another goalie and they feel like they filled that need for them. But for right now, and again, things can change at any moment, the Kings have three goalies on their opening night roster. Speaking of opening night and the roster, what is the lineup going to look like for the LA Kings? We're going to talk about that more in a moment here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. The NHL season is almost here, and obviously I love the NHL. I know you do too, and that's why I want to tell you about Sleeper. Sleeper is my go-to platform for daily fantasy sports, especially daily fantasy hockey. With Sleeper, you have the chance to win 100 times your cash on daily fantasy. The NHL has never been more exciting than it is right now when it comes to fantasy hockey. Connor McDavid, Alexander Ovechkin, Sidney Crosby, Cale Makar, some of the players you want on your fantasy roster if you can get them. Simply select more or less based on their stats, such as goals, assists, points, saves, and more. And all you heard me, Kings fans, Sleeper offering 100 times payout. So start paying attention, make the right picks, and you could win big. Use a promo code LOCKEDONNHL, and you'll get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's term of use for details. All right, we're going to get into what the Kings' current roster looks like. And I will say this again, and it's going to be said probably again. It's a very fluid situation. Things can change from moment to moment, day to day. But I do think there's a lesson to be learned for all of us regarding the Arthur Kaliyev situation. I'm sure you know, suspended for the 4 games, 2 preseason, 2 regular season, and that has put the Kings in a bit of a bind, certainly as far as their depth goes for those first 2 games of the season. But this is something that I think is a good lesson for the team, for the fans, for everybody. First off, for Arthur Kaliyev and the players, your actions have ramifications more than just you not playing. Like Arthur Kaliyev taking this bad penalty and getting suspended has put the Kings in a bit of a bind early on. Now it's just a couple of games, but who knows what games, how it's going to turn out when it's all said and done in the season. What if those potential 4 points turn out costing the Kings home ice advantage in the playoffs? You just don't know. But the lesson that you learned is your actions have ramifications, not just for you, but for the rest of the roster. So be smarter and try not to get suspended because, again, it has an effect on the roster and who the Kings can put on the ice, what positions they put on the ice, things like that. It's not just as easy as, well, he's suspended, we'll just plug this guy into his spot. There's a bigger picture to that. Also, for us as Kings fans, we need to know that with injuries that are coming up, which are inevitably going to happen, possible suspensions, things like that, this kind of juggling with the roster and moving players up and down, this is a reality that we as Kings fans are going to have to get used to this season. Just because that's the circumstance they find themselves in, having spent to the cap, having some players that are waiver exempt and some that are not. So kind of get used to this. I mean, it's been magnified because of the Kaliyev suspension, but this could be a factor with the Kings all season long. We have to be flexible as fans. The players have to be flexible because there may be some plugging and playing going on. They may have to play different positions, different lines, and the coaching staff will have to be flexible as well. The whole organization, as far as what they do, recalls, things like that. So this could be kind of a preview of things to come this season for the LA Kings because of the situation they find themselves in, having spent to the cap, putting out a very talented roster, but it does hurt their depth. So right now, the Kings have a 21-man roster. 11 forwards, 7D, and 3 goalies. This is assuming Jordan Spence gets brought back up from his loan to the AHL. So right now we know, okay, Andrei Kopitar, Adrian Kempe, Quentin Byfield, top line. Second line, Philip Deneau, Victor Arvidsson, Trevor Moore. Okay. Now the third line is where it gets a little bit murky because we know we've got PL Dubois and Kevin Fiala. So Arthur Kaliyev's out for the first 2 games. Who's going to replace him? Well, as I mentioned, the Kings called up Alex Laferriere, and in practice today, he was on the third line with Deneau and Fiala. So the young kid out of Harvard, who's had such a good preseason, looks like he might find himself opening night on the third line for the LA Kings. And that third line is going to be not only very important all season long for the Kings, but in this game, this matchup against Colorado Avalanche as well. The fourth line, as it stands right now, again, the Kings only have 11 forwards, so there will not be three players on the fourth line. It'll likely be Blake Lizotte at center, Trevor Lewis on the wing, and then there'll be some double shifting going on with other players throughout the rest of the game. It's not ideal, but it's something that teams have done. It's not unprecedented. You don't want to do it long term, but short term, you can get away with it. As far as the defensive pairings, we know it's Drew Doughty and Mikey Anderson. We know it's Matt Roy and Vladislav Gavrikov. That third pairing, though, right now, we assume Jordan Spence is going to be recalled, put on the right side, and then it's, I guess, going to be a combination of both Andreas Englund and Tobias Bjornfoot, at least how it stands right now. Now, they could put Englund or Bjornfoot on waivers to see if they clear or not, to, again, juggle with the roster. But as it stands right now, 11 forwards and 7D with getting Jordan Spence back from the AHL. And the three goalies, Cam Talbot, Phoenix Copley, David Riddick. I'm not sure who the opening night starter is going to be. I really don't know. I assume it'll be Cam Talbot. I wouldn't be shocked if it was Phoenix Copley. I might be a little bit surprised if it's David Riddick, because I think they don't want to showcase him. He goes out there and does something insane like pitches a shutout. It's only his value is only going to increase if they have to put him on waivers. So very interesting to see what that opening night lineup is going to be for the LA Kings and how this is all going to sort itself out. It is very interesting to keep an eye on. And again, if you're following us on Twitter, doing a lot of retweeting of a lot of the news out there, if you want to stay on top of this, follow us at Locked On LA Kings. Again, this is not unprecedented to have teams go 11-7. The Edmonton Oilers did it a lot last year. The Vegas Golden Knights did it as well. Turned out pretty well for both those teams. The Oilers did it against the Kings in the playoffs, and the Vegas Golden Knights went on to win the Stanley Cup. So again, it's not an ideal situation. Head coach Todd McClellan has even said it's not something he necessarily wants to do, but the circumstances are what they are, and you have to adjust, and you have to do the best you can with where you are. As for the final preseason game for the Kings on Saturday, the Kings lost a bit of a wild one to the Vegas Golden Knights, 7-4. 5 goals were scored in the opening period, 3 by the Kings, Andrei Kopitar, Matt Roy, and Victor Arvidsson. Kevin Fiala scored the Kings' final goal, the only goal in the second period. And then the third period was all Golden Knights, outscoring the Kings 4-0. One of them was into an empty net. The Kings' penalty kill allowed 2 power play goals against on 5 shorthanded chances. So obviously that's not good with the Kings' focus on the penalty kill. That's certainly not going to get it done. LA for themselves on the power play went 1 for 3. So they lose the special teams battle in that one. Goalie Cam Talbot allowed 6 goals on 34 shots. So not a great final outing for him. The Kings did finish 6-2-1 this preseason. And overall, I think it was a very positive preseason. Now, you can always spin things the way you want, but I'm actually not all that unhappy that they lost their final preseason game and lost it kind of embarrassingly. Now, to me, it gives the team, and again, I thought they had overall a great preseason, but it gives them a little bit of a bad taste in their mouth going into the season opener. It gives head coach Todd McClellan a little bit of an excuse to be a little bit hard on them in practice, maybe than he would be if they had won that game. So I think maybe they go into the season opener with a little bit of an edge. At least that's my hope. You could also argue that had they won that game, they were taking positive momentum into the regular season opener. So like I said, you could spin it any way you want. Personally, though, I'm actually kind of okay with them laying a little bit of an egg and getting a little bit riled up, hopefully, going to the season opener. Although it's been my experience in all sports that preseason is preseason, regular season is regular season. They don't usually carry over much. It happens occasionally. Maybe a player gets off to a good start and carries it over. But for the most part, what we see in the preseason doesn't usually have a ton of influence on what we see in the regular season. Just like the regular season sometimes doesn't have a ton of what we see going on in the playoffs. They're separate seasons, they're separate situations, circumstances, and things like that. So the LA Kings lose their preseason opener, but overall it was, I think, a very solid preseason for the Kings organization as a whole. We're going to take a look at the Kings schedule, which we have not done. We have a rain report, check in on the Ontario Reign And a former LA Kings Stanley Cup winner is in the news. That is all coming up next on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home a winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle at the level that will have giving you its peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash, with all the parts you need at the prices you want. It's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay is Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. As I'm sure you know, the LA Kings play the Colorado Avalanche at Crypto.com Arena Wednesday night, 7 p.m. Pacific time. Catch every moment of the hometown broadcast of your Los Angeles Kings on Sirius XM on the XXM app. He said SXM app. Search LA Kings. We haven't talked about this, but the LA Kings schedule to start the season is tough. 9 games this month. 7 of their 8 opponents were in the playoffs last year, and they start with 2 legitimate Stanley Cup contenders in the Colorado Avalanche and the Carolina Hurricanes. Now, fortunately, both of those are at home, but then the Kings head on the road for games against the Jets and Wild, who both made the playoffs, back home for the Bruins, and then a home and home against the Coyotes. That's the one team the Kings are facing that didn't make the playoffs, and then home against the Maple Leafs on Halloween night. So the Kings are going to get tested right off the hop with some very, very good opponents in the month of October. Speaking of the Maple Leafs, we have some news on a former LA Kings Stanley Cup winner, Jake Muzzin, who had been a defenseman for the Maple Leafs, announced his retirement from hockey at the age of 34. Muzzin's career, you probably know, started in LA, played parts of 8 seasons with the Kings, was on the Kings 2014 Stanley Cup winning team. Then ended up being traded in the Kings rebuild, sent to Toronto for Tobias Bjornfoot, also Sean Dursey and Carl Grundstrom. Bjornfoot was a draft pick that was involved, and that's the player the Kings ended up selecting. So pretty good trade for the LA Kings, especially since Jake Muzzin had a ton of injury issues with the Toronto Maple Leafs, and that's why he's unfortunately announced his retirement. Has not played in an NHL game since October 17th of 2022. Because of a cervical spine injury, and because of that, and he was going to miss this entire upcoming season. You know, he could have tried to come back after this year, maybe, but he's decided the toll on the body, just not worth it for him. And Jake Muzzin has announced his retirement, but there is good news for Jake in that he's already found his next job. He's been hired by the Toronto Maple Leafs as a scout in the organization. He has been placed on long-term injured reserve. He will be making his salary for the final year of his contract this year at $5.625 million. So there is that. We wish Jake Muzzin all the best in his future endeavors. We do have a quick rain report. The Ontario Reign played their one and only preseason game over the weekend, a convincing 6-2 win over the San Diego Gulls. Players like Alex Laferriere and Brant Clark on the roster for Ontario, and they won that preseason game convincingly, with Laferriere getting 2 goals. And also Alex Turcotte had a pair of goals as well. They each had an assist, so a 3-point night for both Laferriere and Turcotte. Francesco Pinelli had a goal as well, and goalie Eric Portillo was solid in net in getting the victory. The Ontario Reign open up the regular season October 13th, this Friday at home, against those same San Diego Gulls. And we will keep an eye on the Ontario Reign all season long for those Kings prospects and let you know how they do here and there. All right, so for you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch Locked On LA Kings every day, we are so excited for this week, not only because of the season opener, but tomorrow we're going to be joined by Locked On Avalanche hosts Chris Maselli and Kyle Sullivan to do a crossover show with them. We did one a couple of weeks ago, but now focusing on the final rosters for each team, what the latest news is on each team, and what we think are the key players and the key matchups for the season opener for the LA Kings. Looking forward to you guys checking that out. And then super excited on Wednesday, the night of the season opener, Nick Nixon, the voice of the Los Angeles Kings, is going to join us here on Locked On LA Kings for the first time. super excited about that. Got to talk to Nick over the weekend, and he's such a nice guy, and can't wait to get his thoughts as the new radio and TV voice of the LA Kings this season. Had been the longtime broadcaster on radio for many, many years, but now with the simulcast, he's also doing television as well, and has been with the LA Kings organization for many, many years. Hall of Fame broadcaster Nick Nixon coming up on Wednesday's show. Also on Thursday, we'll obviously recap what we hope is an LA Kings season opening victory. And then on Friday, it's another LA Kings fan feedback show. I'm sure you've got lots of things on your mind between now and then. If you want to send an email, the email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE, lockedoneddie@gmail.com. If you're watching on YouTube, post your comments below. Those are always welcome. And if you want to stay connected to the show 24/7 with all the things going on, roster moves back and forth, certainly retweet all the Kings newsmakers out there and their official Kings, all the news you get for the Kings. I'm always out there looking for it, retweeting it, and letting you know what's going on. We are on Twitter and Instagram at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you for listening and watching Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. The season opener is right around the corner. Excited about it. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow. And as always, go Kings go.